The November sun struggled through the thick clouds hovering over Lincoln Elementary School in Portland, Oregon. A light drizzle had been falling since dawn, typical of the Pacific Northwest in late autumn. The wet pavement reflected the gray sky, and the smell of damp earth mixed with the aroma of coffee coming from the teacher's lounge. Inside Mrs. Patricia Henderson's fifth-grade classroom, 23 students settled into their seats, shaking off the morning chill. The radiator hissed softly in the corner, fighting against a cold that seemed determined to seep through the old windows of the 1960s-era building. Mrs. Henderson, a woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose and graying hair pulled back in practical bun, stood at the front of the classroom arranging papers on her desk. She wore a burgundy cardigan over a simple dress, comfortable shoes that had walked these hallways for nearly 2 decades. "Good morning, everyone," she said warmly, her voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who had been teaching for nearly 20 years. "I hope you all had a good weekend. Today, we're going to start our unit on American heroes and what heroism really means." The students murmured with interest. Some sat up straighter in their chairs. Others exchanged glances, already thinking about who they might talk about. The classroom smelled of pencil shavings, old books, and the faint sweetness of the apple cinnamon air freshener Mrs. Henderson kept near her desk. In the third row, near the window that overlooked the school courtyard, sat Marcus Thompson, a quiet 10-year-old boy with dark curly hair that needed a trim and eyes that always seemed to be looking at something far away. He wore a slightly oversized gray hoodie, a hand-me-down from a cousin, and jeans that had seen better days but were clean and carefully mended at the knee. His sneakers were worn but tied with precision. While other students began pulling out notebooks and whispering excitedly to each other about their chosen heroes, Marcus simply stared out the rain-spotted window toward the school courtyard, his expression unreadable. "I want each of you to think about someone you consider a hero," Mrs. Henderson continued, writing the word hero in large letters on the whiteboard with a blue dry erase marker. "It doesn't have to be someone famous. It can be anyone who has shown courage, sacrifice, or made a difference in the world, or in your world specifically. Heroes come in all forms, and I want you to think deeply about what makes someone truly heroic." Hands shot up immediately, waving with the enthusiasm only fifth graders could muster. Sarah Martinez, always eager to participate and wearing her favorite purple sweater, waved her hand so enthusiastically she nearly fell out of her chair. "Mrs. Henderson, can I go first?" "Please." "Of course, Sarah. Who is your hero?" Sarah stood up proudly, smoothing down her sweater. "My hero is Serena Williams. She's the best tennis player ever, and she never gave up even when people doubted her. She's strong and powerful and shows that girls can do anything. My mom took me to see her play once in Seattle, and it was amazing." "Excellent choice, Sarah. Can you tell us what specific quality makes her heroic to you?" "Her determination," Sarah answered without hesitation, her dark eyes bright with conviction. "She kept winning even after injuries and when people said she was too old or too this or too that. She never quit. She fought for equal pay for women athletes. She just kept going no matter what." Mrs. Henderson smiled and made a note on the board under qualities of heroes: determination, perseverance, fighting for justice. "Thank you, Sarah. That's a wonderful example of someone who used their platform for good." "Who's next?" Tommy Rodriguez's hand shot up like a rocket. He was a stocky boy with a crew cut and a gap between his front teeth that showed when he smiled. "Captain America." A few students laughed. Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow, a gentle smile on her face. "Tommy, Captain America is a fictional character. I'm looking for real people who have done real things in the real world." Tommy's face fell slightly, his cheeks reddening, but he recovered quickly, snapping his fingers as if he just remembered something. "Okay then, firefighters, especially the ones who went into the Twin Towers on September 11th. My dad told me about them. He said they ran up the stairs while everyone else was running down. They knew they might die, but they went anyway to save people." The classroom grew quieter, the laughter stopping abruptly. Even at 10 years old, these children understood the weight of that reference. Mrs. Henderson nodded solemnly, her expression becoming serious. "That's a very meaningful choice, Tommy. Those firefighters showed incredible bravery and self-sacrifice. They ran toward danger to save others when everyone else was running away. They knew the risks, and they went anyway. That's the definition of heroism. She added bravery and self-sacrifice to the list on the board, her handwriting careful and clear. One by one, students shared their heroes, their voices filling the classroom with stories of courage and inspiration. Jessica Chun, a slight girl with long black hair and a braid, talked about her grandmother who had immigrated to America from Taiwan with nothing but 2 suitcases and built a successful restaurant in Chinatown, learning English at night school while working 2 jobs during the day. Derek Williams, the tallest boy in class and captain of the school basketball team, chose LeBron James, not just for basketball, but for opening a school for underprivileged kids in his hometown of Akron, giving him opportunities he wished he'd had. Emma Rodriguez, Sarah's cousin, selected her older sister, who had joined the Peace Corps and was teaching children in rural Guatemala, living without electricity or running water, to make a difference. Each story added another dimension to what it meant to be heroic. The board filled with qualities: compassion, dedication, sacrifice, vision, courage, service, leadership, resilience. Outside, the rain had stopped and weak sunlight began breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The weather in Portland changed quickly, and the morning was transforming from gray to almost beautiful. Marcus continued staring out the window, his expression unchanged. He hadn't raised his hand once. His fingers drummed lightly on his desk, a nervous habit he had when he was thinking deeply about something. Mrs. Henderson noticed. She always noticed Marcus. He was one of those students who went through the school day like a ghost, present but not quite there, completing assignments adequately but never engaging fully, never raising his hand, never volunteering information. She knew from his file that he lived with his aunt after his father had died in military service overseas 3 years ago. His mother had passed away from cancer when he was just a baby, something he barely remembered. The aunt, Linda Thompson, worked long hours at a local hospital as a registered nurse, doing her best but often stretched in between 12-hour shifts and raising a nephew she hadn't expected to be caring for. Marcus, Mrs. Henderson called gently, her voice soft with understanding. Would you like to share who your hero is? The boy didn't respond immediately. Several students turned to look at him, curiosity evident on their young faces. Marcus was known for being quiet, almost invisible in class discussions. Some kids whispered that he was weird because he never talked about video games or sports or the latest movies. Others simply ignored him, the way children sometimes ignore the quiet ones who don't demand attention. Marcus, Mrs. Henderson repeated, her voice even softer now, almost tender. You don't have to if you're not ready. There's no pressure. Marcus's fingers stopped drumming. He continued looking out the window, and for a moment, Mrs. Henderson thought he wouldn't answer, that he'd retreat into that shell of silence he wore like armor. But then, something changed in the courtyard that caught his attention, that made his entire body go still. A figure had emerged from the maintenance building on the far side of the courtyard. A woman in her late 50s, wearing the dark blue uniform of the school's custodial staff, her graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She carried a folded American flag carefully in her arms, walking with a slight but noticeable limp toward a flagpole that stood in the center of the courtyard. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Marcus sat up straighter, his spine suddenly rigid. His eyes followed every movement the woman made, tracking her progress across the wet pavement with an intensity that was almost physical. I'll share, he said quietly, so quietly that Mrs. Henderson almost didn't hear him over the shuffling of papers and whispered conversations. Wonderful, the teacher encouraged, moving slightly closer to his desk. Who is your hero, Marcus? The boy stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor with sound that seemed too loud in the suddenly attentive classroom. Every eye turned toward him. This was unusual. Marcus Thompson never volunteered for anything, never drew attention to himself, never stood up in front of class unless absolutely required. Some students leaned forward with curiosity. Others exchanged glances of surprise. Marcus walked toward a window, his footsteps steady despite the trembling in his hands. Several students shifted in their seats to see what he was looking at, craning their necks to get a view of the courtyard. He raised his arm and pointed toward the courtyard with a finger that didn't waver, toward the woman who was now kneeling beside the flagpole, carefully unfolding the flag with movements that spoke of reverence and long practice. Her, Marcus said, his voice stronger now, clearer. She's my hero. The classroom erupted in confused murmurs. Students craned their necks to see, some standing up from their desks for a better view. Mrs. Henderson stepped closer to the window, adjusting her glasses to see more clearly, her brow furrowing in confusion. In the courtyard, the woman, whose name tag would have read Gloria Martinez, if anyone had been close enough to see it, was methodically inspecting the flag for any tears or stains, holding each section up to the emerging sunlight. She held it with both hands, treating the fabric as if it were made of the most delicate glass, as if one wrong move might shatter something infinitely precious. Her weathered face, lined with years and experience, showed deep concentration. That's Mrs. Gloria, the janitor," Emma whispered to her neighbor, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "Why would she be his hero? I mean, no offense, but—" "Is he joking?" Another student whispered back, stifling a laugh. A few giggles started to ripple through the classroom, nervous laughter at something they didn't understand. But Mrs. Henderson raised her hand for silence, her expression serious. Something in Marcus's posture, the straightness of his spine, the unwavering direction of his pointing finger, the set of his jaw, told her this was no joke. This mattered to him deeply. "Class, quiet, please," she said firmly, using her teacher voice that brooked no argument. Then, turning to Marcus with genuine interest and respect, "Can you tell us why she's your hero, Marcus?" The boy's jaw tightened. His eyes never left the woman in the courtyard, who was now using a clean white cloth to gently wipe down each section of the flag before raising it, removing any dust or moisture with careful, practiced movements. The morning sun, finally breaking through the clouds completely, caught the colors, red, white, and blue, making them seem to glow in almost ethereal light. Marcus took a deep breath, the kind of breath someone takes before diving into deep water, before saying something that can't be unsaid. "Because," he began, his voice cracking slightly with emotion he was trying to control, "she's the person who saved my dad's life in Afghanistan. She's the reason he didn't die alone in the desert. She's the person who kept her promise to him for 3 years, even though she didn't have to. She's my hero because she shows up every single day and does her job with dignity, and nobody knows that she used to be—" His voice broke completely. The classroom fell into absolute, profound silence. You could have heard a pin drop. 23 students and 1 teacher held their collective breath, waiting. "She's Sergeant Gloria Martinez," Marcus finished, tears now streaming freely down his face. "United States Army, combat medic, 2 tours in Afghanistan, Purple Heart recipient, and the woman who held my father's hand while he died and promised him she'd watch over me. That's who she is. That's my hero." The silence in Mrs. Henderson's classroom was so complete that the ticking of the wall clock seemed thunderous, each second marking time in a moment that had suddenly become sacred. 23 pairs of eyes stared at Marcus Thompson, who remained standing by the window, his arm now lowered but his gaze still fixed on the woman in the courtyard. Outside, Gloria Martinez had finished cleaning the flag and was carefully attaching it to the halyard with movements that spoke of military precision despite her civilian clothes. Mrs. Henderson felt her throat tighten with emotion she hadn't expected. In all her years of teaching, 19 years of lesson plans and parent conferences and standardized tests, she had encountered many profound moments. But something about the scene unfolding before her struck deeper than anything she'd experienced in this classroom. A quiet boy finally speaking his truth. A custodian being revealed as something far more. A story clearly filled with pain and pride, and promises kept against all odds. "Marcus," she said gently, moving closer to him, her hand instinctively reaching out before she caught herself. "Would you like to tell us more about that? Only if you're comfortable sharing. You don't have to." The boy's hands trembled slightly. He shoved them into the pockets of his hoodie, still watching Gloria through the window, watching her raise the flag with slow, deliberate pulls on the rope. The morning light caught the moisture gathering in his eyes, making them shine, but he blinked it away forcefully. trying to maintain his composure. "My dad was Sergeant James Thompson," Marcus began, his voice barely above a whisper. Several students in the front row leaned forward to hear better, their earlier giggles forgotten, replaced by genuine attention. "He was in the Army, infantry. He died 3 years ago in Afghanistan, in a place called Kandahar Province. I was 7. The weight of those words settled over the classroom like a heavy blanket, muffling everything else. Even Tommy Rodriguez, who usually fidgeted constantly, sat completely still. Sarah Martinez had her hand over her mouth. Emma Rodriguez's eyes were already glistening with tears. Marcus continued, his voice growing slightly stronger. "My Aunt Linda told me that he died a hero, saving his unit from an ambush. She said he was brave and strong, and that he loved me more than anything. But she didn't tell me everything. Not until last year, when I found a letter in her drawer while I was looking for batteries for my game controller." He paused, watching as Gloria began to raise the flag slowly, hand over hand, the fabric lifting gradually toward the gray Oregon sky that was now breaking into patches of blue. Each pull of the rope seemed deliberate, measured, respectful. "The letter was from her," Marcus said, gesturing toward the courtyard with his chin. "From Gloria. It was addressed to my aunt, sent right after my dad died. It came with his personal effects, the things they sent back from Afghanistan. I wasn't supposed to read it, but I did. I couldn't stop myself." Mrs. Henderson grabbed the edge of a nearby student desk for support, her knees suddenly feeling weak. She had known Marcus's father had died in service. It was in his school records, noted in red at the top of his file. But she hadn't known any details beyond that basic, terrible fact. Looking at the boy's profile against the window, backlit by the emerging sunlight, she saw a depth of understanding and grief that no 10-year-old should have to carry. "What did the letter say?" asked Tommy Rodriguez, who had completely forgotten about his earlier answer of firefighters. His voice was hushed, respectful in a way that showed real maturity. Marcus turned slightly to face the class, but kept one hand on the window frame, as if the glass connected him to Gloria outside, as if letting go would sever some vital link. "It said that she was there when it happened. Gloria wasn't a janitor in Afghanistan. She was Sergeant Gloria Martinez, a combat medic. She'd been in the Army for 16 years. She'd seen things, done things, saved people's lives in the worst situations you can imagine. Sarah Martinez, no relation to Gloria, just coincidence, raised her hand tentatively, then spoke without waiting to be called on. The same Gloria who cleans our school? Who empties the trash and mops the cafeteria?" "Yes," Marcus nodded, his voice firm. "The same person. But in Afghanistan, she was something different. She was a healer, a warrior, a hero." He took another deep breath, steadying himself for what came next. The letter explained everything that happened that day. There was an attack on their convoy. That's a group of military vehicles traveling together. An IED hit their Humvee. That's an improvised explosive device, a bomb that insurgents hide on the side of the road. It exploded right under their vehicle. The students were completely transfixed, hanging on every word. This wasn't like the sanitized stories they'd heard in history class or the heroic movies they'd seen. This was real, connected to someone they saw every day pushing a mop cart through the hallways, someone they'd barely noticed, someone they'd probably taken completely for granted. "My dad and 3 other soldiers were injured badly in the explosion," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as if telling the story was giving him energy rather than draining it. "Gloria pulled each one of them out of the burning vehicle while they were still under fire from insurgents. She dragged them one by one to cover behind a concrete barrier, and then she started working on them, trying to save their lives while bullets were hitting all around her." Emma Rodriguez let out a small gasp. Jessica Chun had tears running down her cheeks. Even Derek Williams, who prided himself on being tough, looked shaken. "She got my dad out last," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly on the word last. He had shrapnel in his chest and leg, metal fragments from the explosion. The letter said she kept pressure on his wounds while calling for medevac. That's medical evacuation, a helicopter. She stayed with him, protecting his body with her own, even though there was still shooting happening all around them. even though she could have been killed any second. Mrs. Henderson's hand went to her mouth. In the courtyard, Gloria had raised a flag to the top of the pole and was securing the halyard with practiced knots. The flag caught the strengthening breeze and unfurled completely, snapping crisply in the wind, its colors brilliant against the clearing sky. My dad survived that initial attack because of her, Marcus said, his eyes following the flag's movement. The helicopter came and got them all. They flew to a field hospital, basically a bunch of tents with medical equipment. Gloria went with them because 2 of the other soldiers were critical, and she had to keep working on them during the flight. But she never let go of my dad's hand. Not once. A tear rolled down Emma Rodriguez's cheek, then another. Several other students looked like they wanted to cry, but were holding it back, fighting to maintain composure. Tommy Rodriguez was blinking rapidly. Sarah Martinez had both hands pressed to her mouth. At the field hospital, the doctors worked on everyone, Marcus continued. They saved 2 of the soldiers. The third, one died on the operating table. And my dad held on for 6 more hours. 6 hours where Gloria stayed with him, even though she was supposed to be resting, even though she had shrapnel wounds of her own that needed treatment. She refused to leave him. "Oh, Marcus," Mrs. Henderson whispered, unable to contain her emotion. "The letter said that my dad knew he wasn't going to make it," Marcus went on, his voice steady now, as if he'd told himself the story so many times in his head that he'd worn smooth the edges of the pain. He knew his injuries were too severe. But Gloria talked to him. She told him about her life, about growing up in Texas, about her family, about why she joined the Army, about the people she'd saved, about anything and everything she could think of to keep him conscious and fighting. And more importantly, she listened to him. The boy pulled one hand from his pocket and pressed it flat against the window, his palm against the cold glass, as if reaching toward a woman outside who had no idea she was being discussed, being honored, being revealed. Before he died, my dad asked her to promise him something. Marcus said. He asked her to find me when she got home, to check on me, to make sure I was okay, to tell me that he loved me and that he was sorry he had to leave, to tell me that he fought as hard as he could to stay. And she did, Mrs. Henderson said softly, understanding flooding through her like light breaking through darkness. Marcus nodded vigorously, his curls bouncing. She looked for us for almost 2 years. It took her that long because she didn't know where Aunt Linda lived. My dad only told her our names before he passed. Dad was from Ohio originally, but Aunt Linda had moved to Portland for her nursing job. Gloria didn't know that, but she searched anyway. She used Facebook, veteran organizations, military databases, everything she'd think of. She never gave up. He finally turned completely away from the window to face his classmates, meeting their eyes one by one. His own eyes were red-rimmed but dry now, his voice steady with conviction. When she finally found us, Aunt Linda was so surprised. Gloria called her out of the blue and asked if she could meet. They met at a coffee shop downtown, the one on Morrison Street. Gloria told my aunt the whole story, everything that happened, everything my dad said, everything she'd been carrying for 2 years. Derek Williams, who had chosen LeBron James as his hero, spoke up. Why does she work here? At our school? She could probably do anything. She's a veteran, a medic, a hero. Marcus's expression softened with something like admiration mixed with sadness, because she promised my dad she'd watch over me. When she found out I went to Lincoln Elementary, she applied for a job here. Any job. The only opening was in custodial services. She took it without hesitation. The classroom felt like a church, like sacred space where profound truth was being spoken and received. Mrs. Henderson could feel the transformation happening in real time. 23 children learning what service really meant, what sacrifice looked like, what love could drive a person to do. She told Aunt Linda she wanted to be nearby, Marcus continued, to make sure I was okay, even if I didn't know who she was. She didn't want recognition or thanks. She just wanted to keep her promise to a dying soldier. So she moved from Texas, left her family, took a job that paid way less than she could make doing something else, all so she could watch over me from a distance. Mrs. Henderson felt tears streaming down her own face now. She didn't bother wiping them away. This was a moment that deserved tears, that required emotional honesty. Does Gloria know that you know who she is? Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice thick. The boy shook his head firmly. No, Aunt Linda made me promise not to tell her. She said Gloria would be embarrassed, that she didn't do it for recognition or thanks or praise. She did it because she made a promise to a dying soldier, and she's the kind of person who keeps promises no matter what, no matter how hard, no matter how long it takes, no matter what it costs her. The classroom had been completely transformed. These children, who minutes ago had been giggling and whispering and thinking about recess and lunch, had become witnesses to something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. They were learning, truly learning, what words like honor and duty and sacrifice actually meant when lived out in real human experience. She cleans the flag every Monday morning, Marcus said, pointing back out the window where Gloria was now collecting her cleaning supplies, preparing to return to the maintenance building. She does it before most of us get to school, usually. But today there was a leak in the cafeteria that Mr. Jenkins needed help with, so she's running late. I've been watching her do it for over a year, every single Monday, and she treats that flag like it's the most precious thing in the world. Because to her it is, Mrs. Henderson said quietly, understanding completely. Yes, Marcus agreed, his voice filled with conviction beyond his years. That flag represents everything she fought for, everything my dad died for, everything those other soldiers sacrificed. She treats it with respect because she knows exactly what it costs to keep it flying. She knows the price of freedom isn't just some saying on a bumper sticker. It's blood and pain and loss, and people who don't come home. It's promises made in the worst moments and kept across years and miles. It's showing up every day and doing your job with dignity, even when nobody knows your story. Outside, the flag Gloria Martinez had raised that morning continued to fly, snapping the wind, its colors brilliant against the sky that had finally cleared completely. And in that fifth-grade classroom, 23 students and one teacher understood that they had just learned the most important lesson of the year, maybe of their lives. The recess bell had rung 15 minutes ago, its shrill sound echoing to the hallways of Lincoln Elementary, but Mrs. Henderson's fifth-grade class remained seated in their desks, suspended in a moment that felt too sacred to break with something as mundane as playground time. Outside the tall classroom windows, other students ran and played in the courtyard, their shouts and laughter a distant soundtrack to profound silence inside room 214. The flag Gloria Martinez had raised fluttered and snapped rhythmically in the strengthening breeze, a constant visual reminder of the story Marcus Thompson had just shared. Mrs. Henderson stood at the front of the classroom near her desk, her carefully prepared lesson plan for the day, complete with worksheets on identify heroic qualities and a vocabulary list she'd spent an hour preparing the night before, lay forgotten and irrelevant in her folder. In her 19 years of teaching, she'd witnessed many moments of connection, breakthrough, and growth. She'd seen students overcome learning disabilities, watched shy children find their voices, celebrated academic achievements both large and small. But this felt fundamentally different. This felt like a turning point, not just for Marcus, but for every single person in that room, herself included. Marcus, she said gently, her voice still thick with emotion. Thank you for trusting us with your story. I know that couldn't have been easy. Sharing something so personal, so painful, takes real courage. The boy nodded, still standing by the window with the morning light, created a halo effect around his dark curly hair. His shoulders, which had been rigid with tension throughout his telling, finally relaxed slightly. He looked exhausted, drained, as if speaking those words had cost him something essential, had taken energy he wasn't sure he could spare. "Can I go to the bathroom?" he asked quietly, his voice small again, retreating back into the quietness that was his usual mode. "Of course, sweetheart. Take all the time you need," Mrs. Henderson said, using an endearment she rarely employed but that felt right in this moment. As Marcus left the room, closing the door softly behind him with a click that seemed too loud in the quiet, Mrs. Henderson turned to face the rest of her students. 22 young faces looked back at her. Fifth graders who had arrived at school that morning thinking about video games and recess and what was for lunch, who were now sitting in stunned, thoughtful silence, processing something far beyond typical elementary school experience. Their expressions range from thoughtful to tearful to awed, from confused to deeply moved. "I want everyone to take out your journals," Mrs. Henderson said, moving to perch on the edge of her desk, a position she took when she wanted to have more intimate, meaningful conversations with her class. "We're going to write about what we've learned today, not specifically about Marcus's story. That's his tell or not tell, and we need to respect his privacy and his courage. But I want you to write about what heroism means to you now, after hearing about real sacrifice and real service, after understanding what it truly costs some people to be heroes." The students reached for their notebooks with unusual solemnity, none of the typical complaining about writing assignments. Even Tommy Rodriguez, who typically groaned about any task involving pencil and paper, pulled out his journal without protest. The scratch of pencils on paper filled the room, punctuated only by occasional sniffles and the distant sounds of recess outside. Some students wrote quickly, their thoughts pouring out. Others sat staring at blank pages, processing, thinking, try to find words adequate to what they were feeling. Mrs. Henderson watched them write, but her mind was elsewhere, her thoughts spiraling through implications and realizations. She was thinking about Gloria Martinez, the woman she'd passed in the hallways hundreds of times over the past 3 years with barely a glance, maybe a distracted smile, maybe a quick good morning, spoken while her mind was already on the day's lessons or the emails waiting in her inbox. How many times had she seen Gloria pushing her yellow cleaning cart, emptying trash cans in the teacher's lounge, mopping up spills in the cafeteria, fixing broken bulletin boards in hallways? How many times had she failed to really see the person doing that work? The door opened quietly, and Marcus slipped back into the room. His face was freshly washed, water still glistening in his hair, where he'd apparently splashed it to compose himself. His eyes were still red-rimmed but clearer, less burdened somehow. He took a seat by the window and pulled out his own journal, beginning to write with the same intensity the other students showed. After 20 minutes that felt both endless and too brief, Mrs. Henderson called time. "Would anyone like to share what you wrote? Remember, this is voluntary. You only share if you feel comfortable." Sarah Martinez's hand shot up immediately, her usual enthusiasm tempered now by genuine thoughtfulness. When Mrs. Henderson nodded at her, Sarah stood, smoothing down her purple sweater, and read from her journal in a voice that trembled slightly. "I wrote that I thought heroism was about being famous, and everyone knowing your name, and getting awards, and being on TV. But now I think it's about doing hard things even when nobody sees you, even when nobody knows what you're doing or why. It's about keeping promises and taking care of people even when it's difficult or costs you something important. It's about choosing service over comfort. Mrs. Gloria could have stayed in Texas with her family. She could have gotten a better job. But she chose to keep a promise to someone who died, and that's real heroism." "Beautiful. Sarah, thank you for that insight," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice warm with approval. "Anyone else?" Derek Williams, the tall boy who had chosen LeBron James and who usually projected an air of cool detachment, raised his hand tentatively. When called on, he stood, his basketball jersey hanging loose on his lanky frame, and spoke quietly. "I still think athletes can be heroes when they use their platform to help others, like I said about LeBron opening that school. But I realize now I was choosing him partly because he's cool and famous and good at basketball, which I care about. Now I'm thinking about my mom's friend Maria, who takes care of her disabled sister every single day, giving her medicine and helping her eat and keeping her company even though it's really hard and she never gets time off and nobody gives her awards for it. That's heroic too, right? Maybe even more heroic because she doesn't get recognition or money or fame. She just does it because it's right." "Absolutely, Derek," Mrs. Henderson affirmed, nodding. "Heroism often happens in quiet moments, in daily sacrifices that nobody applauds, in choices made again and again and again when no one is watching." Emma Rodriguez spoke up next without raising her hand, too moved to wait for permission. "I wrote about how we walk past heroes every day without knowing it, without seeing them. The crossing guard, Mr. Peterson, who makes sure we're safe every morning and afternoon, even in the rain and cold. The lunch staff who make sure kids who can't afford food still get fed and never make them feel bad about it. The teachers who stay late to help struggling students when they could be home with their families. She paused, looking directly at Mrs. Henderson with eyes that held genuine appreciation. The teachers who create safe spaces for kids to share their stories and be vulnerable. The comment hit Mrs. Henderson harder than she expected, creating a lump in her throat that made speaking difficult. She had to take a moment, clearing her throat and blinking back fresh tears before responding. Thank you, Emma. I think you're absolutely right. Heroism is often invisible until someone takes the time to really see it, to look beyond the surface of what someone does to understand why they do it. Jessica Chun, the slight girl who had spoken about her immigrant grandmother, added in her soft voice, I wrote that my grandma, who I talked about earlier, is still my hero. But now I understand it's not just because she built a successful restaurant or learned English or achieved the American dream. It's because she did it while raising 4 kids alone after my grandfather died in a factory accident. She worked 16-hour days. She kept going even when everything was hard, when she was exhausted, when she could barely pay rent, when people were mean to her because of her accent. That's what makes her heroic, not the success at the end, but the perseverance through difficulty, the refusal to give up even when giving up would have been easier. The classroom had become a space of genuine reflection and growth, the kind of authentic learning that couldn't be captured on standardized tests or measured by district benchmarks. Mrs. Henderson could feel it, that rare, precious moment when education transcends curriculum and becomes real wisdom, when students connect abstract concepts to lived human experience. Tommy Rodriguez raised his hand, his expression serious in a way Mrs. Henderson had rarely seen from a usually boisterous boy. Can I say something important? Of course, Tommy. The boy stood up, his stocky frame straightening with determination, his gap-toothed smile absent, replaced by genuine remorse. I need to apologize to Marcus. When you first pointed to Mrs. Gloria in the courtyard, I almost laughed. I thought you were joking or being weird. I didn't understand. I'm really, really sorry, Marcus. I was wrong to judge without knowing anything. Marcus looked up from his journal, surprise evident on his face, his eyes widening. It's okay, Tommy. How could you have known? I never told anyone before today. But that's exactly the point, Tommy insisted, his voice passionate, his hands gesturing emphatically. I shouldn't have assumed anything. Just because someone's job doesn't seem important or exciting doesn't mean they're not amazing or heroic or deserving of respect. I judged Mrs. Gloria without knowing a single thing about her except that she cleans our school. That was wrong. I'm going to try to do better. Several other students nodded vigorously, and a few murmured their own apologies, their voices creating a gentle chorus of regret and resolution. Marcus waved them off, embarrassed by the attention, but clearly moved by his classmates' sincere responses, by their willingness to examine their own assumptions and biases. Mrs. Henderson decided to push the conversation deeper, to help her students grapple with the responsibility that came with knowledge. Class, what Marcus shared with us today carries a responsibility. We now know something about Gloria Martinez that she chose to keep private. We know about her military service, her sacrifice, her combat experience, her promise to Marcus's father. What do we do with that knowledge? How do we honor it without betraying the trust Marcus placed in us? The students sat with question, the silence heavy with thought. The clock ticked. Outside, recess was ending. Other classes lining up to come inside. Finally, Sarah raised her hand again, her expression thoughtful. We honor it by respecting her privacy, Sarah said carefully, as if testing each word. She didn't want recognition or attention, so we don't make a big deal about it publicly or tell other classes or make her feel uncomfortable. But maybe we can be more respectful and kind to everyone who works at our school, not just because of what we know about Mrs. Gloria specifically, but because everyone deserves that respect regardless of their job or title. Exactly right, Sarah, Mrs. Henderson said, relief and pride filling her voice. We can't unknow what we've learned, but we can choose how to carry that knowledge with wisdom and respect. Marcus, is there anything you want to add to what Sarah said? The boy thought for a moment, his brow furrowing with concentration, then spoke quietly but with conviction. My Aunt Linda says that Gloria keeps a promise to my dad every day just by being here, just by showing up. She didn't have to move to Portland from Texas, where her whole family lives, her kids, her grandchildren, her sisters. She didn't have to take a job at an elementary school for way less money than she could make using her medical training somewhere else. She did it because integrity matters to her more than comfort or recognition or money, because keeping her word matters more than anything else. He paused, looking out the flag still fly in the courtyard, its colors vivid in the late morning sun. I think the best way we can honor her is by trying to live with that same kind of integrity, by doing the right thing even when it's hard, even when nobody's watching, even when we don't get credit for it, even when it costs us something. That's what she taught me by example, and that's what I want to learn from her. The wisdom in his words. Coming from a 10-year-old who had lost his father at 7, who had carried the weight of Gloria's secret for over a year, who had finally found the courage to share it with his classmates, moved every person in that room to their core. Mrs. Henderson had to look away, pretending to adjust her glasses to hide the fresh tears threatening to spill. She stood up and walked to a whiteboard where she had written hero at the beginning of class, what felt like hours ago but had been less than 90 minutes. Underneath it, she had listed qualities throughout the morning: determination, perseverance, bravery, self-sacrifice, fighting for justice. Now she picked up her blue marker and added new ones, writing slowly and deliberately, each word a declaration: integrity, humility, daily commitment, invisible service, promise-keeping, quiet strength, choosing right over easy. These, she said, turning to face her students, gesturing to the board with the marker still in her hand, are also qualities of heroism. Sometimes the most heroic acts are the ones nobody sees. The daily choice to show up when you'd rather stay home. The decision to care when apathy would be easier. The commitment to keep promises even when they're incredibly hard and costly. The willingness to serve without expecting recognition, applause, or reward. The school's intercom crackled to life, making everyone jump slightly, breaking the spell of the moment. Principal Walters' professional voice filled the classroom. Teachers, please send your students to lunch. 5th grade, you're up next. Thank you. But Mrs. Henderson hesitated, her hand raised in a gesture that meant wait. Class, before we go to lunch, I want to propose something. Marcus shared something incredibly personal and brave with us today, something he's been carrying alone for a very long time. I think we should acknowledge that, not to single him out or make him uncomfortable, but to thank him for his trust and his courage in making himself vulnerable with us. She looked at Marcus, asking permission with her eyes, making sure this was okay. The boy bit his lip, considering, then gave a small but definite nod of consent. Everyone please stand, Mrs. Henderson said softly. The students rose from their desks, creating a chorus of scraping chairs against linoleum, rustling papers, shuffling feet. They stood facing Marcus, their young faces reflecting a range of emotions: respect, admiration, empathy, gratitude. The classroom felt like a ceremony, like something important was happening. Marcus Thompson, Mrs. Henderson said formally, her teacher voice giving way to something more personal, more human. Thank you for sharing your story and your hero with us. Thank you for your courage and your wisdom. Thank you for teaching us what heroism really means. Thank you for trusting us with something precious. And then, spontaneously, without any prompting, Sarah Martinez began to clap. It wasn't the raucous applause of school assembly or the polite, perfunctory clapping of a required response. It was genuine, heartfelt, respectful, the kind of applause that honors rather than celebrates, that acknowledges depth rather than performance. One by one, the other students joined in until the entire classroom resonated with the sound of appreciation. 22 pairs of hands coming together in recognition of one boy's courage. Marcus's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different tears. Not tears of grief or pain or the burden of secrets, but tears of being seen, of being understood, of no longer carrying his knowledge alone, of being part of a community that could hold his truth with care. He stood and gave a small, awkward bow, then wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie, smiling despite himself, his face transforming with something like relief. As the applause died down and the students again filed out to lunch, chattering quietly among themselves with new awareness and seriousness, Mrs. Henderson called Marcus aside, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "That was incredibly brave," she told him, looking directly into his eyes, so he would know she meant every word. "How are you feeling right now?" "Lighter," Marcus admitted, his voice surprised by his own answer. "I've known about Gloria for more than a year, and it felt like carrying this huge boulder everywhere I went, like I had to protect this secret all by myself. Now, I don't know. It feels like other people are helping me carry it. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Mrs. Henderson assured him. "That's what community does when it's working right. We share the weight of difficult things, so no one has to carry them alone. Marcus, I'd like your permission to share what you told us today with the other teachers and staff, particularly Principal Walters and the school counselor. Not to make a big public thing out of it, but so that we as adults can be more aware and supportive of you. Would that be okay?" Marcus considered this carefully, his young face serious with the weight of the decision. Will it get Gloria in trouble or make things weird for her? "I don't want her to feel uncomfortable or exposed." "No," Mrs. Henderson assured him firmly. "We'll be very discreet and respectful. But I think it's important that the adults who work with you every day understand what you've experienced and what you carry. It helps us serve you better, support you better. And it might help us all be more aware of the people around us who carry stories we don't know." "Okay," Marcus agreed after a moment. "But please, nobody should treat Gloria differently. She'd absolutely hate that. She'd probably quit and move away, and then I really would have failed my dad and broken her promise." "I understand completely. We'll be very careful," Mrs. Henderson promised. "Now go get lunch. You've more than earned a break, and you must be exhausted." As Marcus left the classroom, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, Mrs. Henderson sank into her chair, emotionally and physically exhausted. Through the window, she could see students play in the courtyard, eating lunches from home or the cafeteria, laughing and running, and being normal fifth graders. The usual chaos and energy of elementary school. But inside room 214, something had shifted permanently and profoundly. Her students had learned that heroism wasn't always spectacular or recognized with medals and parades. They'd learned that the people we pass every day in hallways and streets might carry stories of extraordinary courage and sacrifice. They'd learned that real heroes often choose invisible service over public acclaim, that integrity sometimes means doing hard things that no one will ever know about, that promises made in the worst moments can be kept across years and miles and enormous personal cost. And more than anything, they'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell your truth, share your pain, trust others to handle your story with care, and believe that vulnerability can create connection rather than judgment. Outside, the flag Gloria Martinez had raised that morning continued to fly against a clearing Portland sky, a symbol of everything she'd fought for and everything she'd lost, everything she continued to protect and honor through her quiet, invisible, daily promise-keeping. And inside Lincoln Elementary School, a small revolution of awareness had begun. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus Thompson stood in Mrs. Henderson's classroom and pointed to Gloria Martinez in the courtyard, declaring her his hero and forever changing how 23 fifth graders understood courage, service, and sacrifice. In those 3 weeks, 21 days that had somehow felt both endless and impossibly brief, subtle but significant changes had rippled through Lincoln Elementary School in ways that honored Gloria's privacy while transforming the school's culture in profound ways. The November rain that had characterized the morning of Marcus's revelation had given way to the sharper cold of early December. Portland's typical gray skies now occasionally clear to reveal crisp, painfully blue afternoons when your breath came out in visible clouds and frost decorated the edges of windows in delicate patterns. Christmas decorations had begun appearing in classroom windows. Paper snowflakes, construction paper Santa Clauses, strings of lights blinking cheerfully. The student council had organized a toy drive for children in need, and donation boxes overflowed in the main hallway. But the most profound change at Lincoln Elementary wasn't visible in decorations or charitable activities. It was in how people saw each other, acknowledged each other, honored each other's humanity. Mrs. Henderson had kept her promise to Marcus. 2 days after his revelation, she requested a private meeting with Principal Walters and shared his story during a quiet afternoon in the principal's office, emphasizing repeatedly the absolute need for discretion and respect for Gloria's privacy and Marcus's vulnerability. Principal Walters, a former Marine herself who had served in the First Gulf War, had been deeply moved by the account. She'd sat in silence for several moments after Mrs. Henderson finished speaking, her jaw tight with emotion, her eyes distant with what looked like memories of her own service. "We don't make announcements or give awards," Principal Walters had said finally, her voice firm with conviction. "We don't put her on stage in an assembly or write about her in a newsletter or do anything that would violate her choice to serve quietly. But we can create a school culture that values all service, visible and invisible. We can teach our students and remind ourselves to see people, really see them, regardless of their job title or role or position, in whatever hierarchy we constructed." The staff members who were told, carefully selected for their discretion and understanding, had agreed unanimously, some with tears in their eyes. And so began a quiet revolution of awareness and appreciation that spread through Lincoln Elementary like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. On this particular Monday morning in mid-December, with Christmas break looming just 1 week away, Marcus arrived at school early, as he always did. His Aunt Linda dropped him off on her way to her nursing shift at Oregon Health and Science University, the big hospital on the hill. She kissed his forehead and reminded him she loved him. Their morning ritual since his father's death, a small anchor of affection in a world that had been unpredictable and painful. Marcus walked to the front doors of Lincoln Elementary with his backpack hanging off one shoulder, his breath visible in the cold December air, frost crunching under his worn sneakers. He headed straight for Mrs. Henderson's classroom, as had become his habit on Monday mornings, knowing she'd be there early, preparing for the day, grading papers, or planning lessons. Through the window that overlooked the courtyard, he could see the familiar scene, the flagpole standing sentinel in the center of the empty space, and there, right on schedule like clockwork, was Gloria Martinez, carefully unfolding the American flag from a protective case with the same reverence she showed every single Monday without fail. Marcus pressed his palm against the cold glass of the window, his breath fogging the surface, watching her with the same attention he'd given her for over a year before he'd finally spoken up in class. The watching had felt lonely before that November day, like holding a secret too big for one person, too heavy for young shoulders. Now it felt different, transformed. Now it felt like bearing witness, like honoring something sacred, like being part of a community of understanding rather than isolated with knowledge. "Good morning, Marcus," Mrs. Henderson said warmly, looking up from her desk where she was writing comments on student essays. "You're early again. You know, you don't have to come in before school starts every day." "I know," Marcus replied, not taking his eyes off Gloria. "But I like to. She's out there." Mrs. Henderson rose from her desk and came to stand beside him at the window, her coffee mug warming her hands. Together they watched in comfortable silence as Gloria inspected the flag for any damage, checking seams, looking for tears or stains, her movements careful and deliberate despite the cold that had to be making her old combat injuries ache terribly. The doctors had told her the shrapnel still embedded in her hip and left leg would hurt more in cold weather. Marcus had learned from reading and rereading her letter to his aunt. "I've been thinking a lot," Marcus said quietly, his voice thoughtful in the way it had become since sharing his story. "About what my dad would want. About what would honor him and Gloria both without making her uncomfortable or breaking her privacy." Mrs. Henderson waited, sipping her coffee, giving him space to continue at his own pace. She'd learned that Marcus needed time to formulate his thoughts, that rushing him only made him retreat. "Christmas is coming in just over a week," Marcus continued. "Aunt Linda and I don't do much. Just the two of us, you know. We usually go to the Veterans Cemetery on Christmas Eve to visit my dad's memorial stone. We leave flowers and a small flag. We sit there for a while and talk to him, tell him about the year. But this year, I want to do something else too. Something more." "What's that?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently. Marcus finally turned from the window to look at his teacher, his dark eyes serious and somehow older than they should be. "I want to write Gloria a letter. Not to give to her directly. That would make her super uncomfortable, and she might even quit or leave. But to put in her employee mailbox in the office. A letter thanking her for keeping her promise to my dad. For watching over me even though she didn't have to. For being a hero even when nobody knows it. For showing me what integrity looks like in real life. Mrs. Henderson felt her throat tighten with emotion that was becoming familiar. Marcus, that's a beautiful idea. A really beautiful, thoughtful idea. Would you like help writing it? We could work on it together. Maybe. I want to get the words exactly right. I want to know that I know who she is and what she's done. But I also want to know that I understand why she does it quietly. That I'm not going to expose her or make things weird. And that I'm trying really hard to be worthy of what my dad and she fought for, what they sacrificed. Before Mrs. Henderson could respond, the classroom door opened and Sarah Martinez walked in, her purple jacket dusted with frost, followed closely by Tommy Rodriguez and Emma Rodriguez. The three students had developed a habit of arriving early on Mondays over the past 3 weeks, drawn by the same understanding that had transformed them all that day in November, wanted to witness Gloria's flag-raising ritual with Marcus, to participate in honoring something they now understood as sacred. Is she out there doing the flag? Sarah asked eagerly but quietly, already heading to the window. Yeah, Marcus confirmed, moving over to make room. Same as always. Same as every Monday. The 4 students and their teacher stood together at the window, watching Gloria Martinez perform her weekly ritual with the precision and care of someone for whom this was far more than a job duty. Other students began filtering into the classroom, hanging up backpacks, pulling out homework, chattering about weekend activities. But word spread quickly among those who knew. It was Monday morning. Gloria was at the flagpole, and something important was happening outside that deserved attention and respect. By the time Gloria had attached the flag to the halyard and begun raising it slowly up the pole, hand over hand, each pull deliberate and measured, nearly the entire 5th grade class stood watching through the windows. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't laugh or push or exhibit their usual Monday morning restlessness. They simply watched in respectful silence as a woman, in a dark blue custodian's uniform, honored the symbol of the country she'd served, the comrades she'd lost, the promises she'd made, and continue to keep. When the flag reached the top of the pole and caught the sharp December breeze, unfurling in a brilliant display of red, white, and blue against the impossibly blue Portland sky, something that had become ritual happened. Marcus Thompson placed his right hand over his heart. One by one, without being told or prompted, every student in the classroom did the same, their small hands pressed over their hearts, their faces serious with understanding. Mrs. Henderson's eyes filled with tears, as they did almost every Monday now. This was what education was supposed to be at its core, not just a transfer of information from textbook to test, but the transformation of understanding into action, of knowledge into wisdom, of awareness into respect and love. This was learning that mattered. That would stay with these children long after they'd forgotten algebra formulas and state capitals. Gloria secured the halyard with practiced knots and stepped back, performing a salute that was crisp and perfect despite her civilian clothes and the years since she'd worn a military uniform. The students watching from the classroom windows couldn't hear her, but Marcus knew from the journal she kept. The journal she'd given to his Aunt Linda, which Linda had given to him on his 9th birthday, that she spoke the names of the fallen every time she raised a flag. His father's name would be among them, Sergeant James Thompson, who trusted me to keep my word. After Gloria collected her supplies, her cleaning cloth, her small bottle of flag safe cleaner, her inspection checklist, and limped back toward the maintenance building, favoring her left leg as she always did when the weather was cold, the students slowly returned to their desks. The usual Monday morning energy was present but muted, tempered by something deeper and more meaningful that they'd all witnessed together. "Okay, everyone," Mrs. Henderson said, clearing her throat and trying to regain her professional composure, wiping her eyes discreetly. "Let's begin our day. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance." The students rose, and as they recited the familiar words they'd spoken thousands of times in their young lives, words that had once been just routine, just something you did before morning announcements, they spoke with an intentionality and understanding that transformed routine into something profound and alive. "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." The words echoed differently now, weighted with meaning they'd never carried before. They weren't just words anymore, just sounds to mumble through before getting on with the real day. They were connected to Gloria's weather hands carefully cleaning fabric, to her perfect salute to fallen comrades, to Sergeant James Thompson dying in a field hospital while holding a medic's hand, using his last breaths to extract a promise, to that medic keeping her promise across years and miles and tremendous personal cost, across pain and sacrifice and the quiet surrender of her own comfort and happiness. As the class settled in for their first lesson, a continuation of their fractions unit that seemed almost absurdly mundane after morning's ritual, Principal Walters' voice came over the intercom, crackling slightly. "Good morning, Lincoln Elementary family. As we approach winter break, I want to remind everyone that this week is National Gratitude Week. We encourage all students and staff to take time to thank the people who make our school run smoothly every single day, our cafeteria workers who provide nourishment, our office staff who keep everything organized, our maintenance and custodial team who keep our buildings safe and clean, our crossing guards who protect you, our bus drivers who transport you safely, and all the individuals who contribute to our learning community in ways large and small. Sometimes the most important people are the ones we see every day but rarely acknowledge or truly appreciate. Let's change that this week and every week going forward." Mrs. Henderson smiled slightly, catching Marcus's eye. Principal Walters hadn't mentioned Gloria specifically. She'd been careful about that, honoring her commitment to privacy, but the message was clear and perfectly calibrated. Honor all service workers. See people. Express gratitude. Create a culture of appreciation without singling anyone out. Throughout that day and the days that followed, Marcus noticed subtle but meaningful changes rippling through Lincoln Elementary. In the hallway, he saw students actually saying "thank you" to Ms. Jenkins, the older crossing guard, when she held the door open for them instead of just rushing past. In the cafeteria, kids were stacking their trays properly in the designated areas, and some were even helping wipe down tables without being asked or assigned the task. During art class, someone had started a card-making project to give appreciation cards to school staff, and the art room tables were covered with colorful, heartfelt creations. And when Marcus passed Gloria in the hallway that Tuesday afternoon, she was on a ladder fixing a broken bulletin board near the library, her movements slow and careful because of her injuries. He smiled up at her and said clearly, "Hi, Mrs. Gloria. Thank you for all you do for our school." Gloria looked down from the ladder, surprised but pleased, her weathered face breaking into a genuine smile that created deep crinkles around her eyes. "You're very welcome, sweetheart. You have a good day now, you hear?" If she recognized him as James Thompson's son, and Marcus was absolutely certain she did, that she'd known from the very first day she started working at Lincoln Elementary exactly where his classroom was, which route he took to cafeteria, where he played during recess, and had probably checked on him from a distance countless times. She gave no indication beyond perhaps a slight softening in her eyes. She simply returned to her work, maintaining the boundaries she'd set for herself, keeping her promise in the way she'd chosen, honoring his father's last request through invisible daily service. That evening, sitting at the small kitchen table in his aunt's modest apartment, a two-bedroom place that was clean but worn, filled with second-hand furniture and framed pictures of his father in uniform, Marcus pulled out a piece of lined notebook paper and began to write. Aunt Linda was working a late shift, pulling a double because another nurse had called in sick, so he had the quiet space and solitude to find the right words, to say what needed to be said. "Dear Mrs. Gloria," he wrote in his careful handwriting, then immediately crossed it out. Too formal, too distant. He started again on a fresh sheet of paper. "Dear Gloria, I don't know if you know who I am, but I know who you are. I know what you did for my dad, Sergeant James Thompson, in Afghanistan. I know about the promise you made to him while he was dying, and I know that you've been keeping that promise every single day by working in my school, by watching over me even though I didn't know it. I'm not supposed to know this. My Aunt Linda told me not to tell you because she said you'd be embarrassed, that you did what you did because it was right, not because you wanted thanks or recognition or praise. But I need you to know that I know, and I'm so grateful I can barely find words big enough to express it. Every Monday morning, I watch you raise the flag. I see how carefully you treat it, how you inspect every inch of it, how you salute it, how you take your time even when you're probably cold or your leg and hip hurt from your old injuries or you're tired from your weekend. I understand now what that flag means to you. It's not just cloth and colors and stars and stripes. It's every person who fought to protect what it represents. It's my dad and all the others who didn't come home to their families. It's also people like you who came home but carry the weight of those who didn't, who live with their promises and their memories every single day. You don't have to watch over me from a distance anymore if you don't want to. I'm okay. Aunt Linda takes really good care of me. She works so hard and loves me so much. I have good teachers like Mrs. Henderson and friends at school like Sarah and Tommy and Emma. I'm doing well in my classes. I'm trying to be kind to people. My dad will be proud of how I've turned out, I think. And a big part of that, maybe the biggest part, is because you kept your promise to him. You showed me what integrity looks like when it's lived out instead of just talked about. You showed me what service means. You showed me that heroes don't need recognition or applause or medals on their chest. They just do what's right because it's right, because they promised, because they're the kind of people who keep their word no matter what it costs. I won't make a big deal about this at school. I won't tell everyone your story or make you uncomfortable or put you in a position where you feel exposed. Your secret is safe with me and the few people who know. But I needed you to know that your promise is fulfilled. I'm safe. I'm loved. I'm being raised by good people who care about me. And I'm trying every single day to be worthy of what my dad fought for and what you continue to honor through your quiet service. Thank you for saving my dad's life that day, even if it was only for a few more hours. Thank you for giving him time to share his last words with someone who would remember them and pass them on to me through that journal you gave Aunt Linda. Thank you for being the kind of person who keeps promises even when they're hard, even when they cost you your own comfort and happiness. Thank you for being my hero, even though you didn't know I knew. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Gloria. I hope you can spend it with your family in Texas, your kids and grandchildren that you told my dad about in the hospital, and that you know you've made a difference in this world that goes far beyond what you might realize. You changed my life. You're changing it every day just by being who you are. With deep respect and gratitude that I'll carry all my life, Marcus Thompson. He read it over 3 times, making small corrections with his pencil, adding a word here, removing one there, making sure every sentence said exactly what he meant. When he was finally satisfied, he copied it onto fresh paper in his absolute neatest handwriting, taking his time with each letter, making it perfect. The next morning, before the first bell rang, and before most students had arrived, Marcus slipped into the main office where the employee mailboxes were mounted on the wall in alphabetical order. Mrs. Chun, the school secretary, was busy on the phone dealing with an attendance issue. Her back turned. Marcus quickly found a box labeled G. Martinez Custodial and slid his carefully folded letter inside, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone in the building must be able to hear it. A mixture of nervousness and relief flooded through him as he walked away quickly, his sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. He didn't know if Gloria would respond. He didn't expect her to. The letter wasn't about getting a response or starting a relationship. It was about saying what needed to be said, about honoring what needed to be honored, about completing a circle of gratitude that had started in a combat zone in Afghanistan and ended in a Portland elementary school, about fulfilling his own promise to his father's memory. That following Monday, the last Monday before Christmas break, Marcus stood at his usual spot by the window, watching Gloria perform her weekly ritual with the flag. But this time, he noticed something different, something that made his breath catch. When she finished raising the flag and stepped back to perform her salute, she stood there longer than usual. Her hand stayed over her heart for several extra beats, 5, 10, 15 seconds. And when she finally lowered her hand, she turned toward the school building, toward the 5th grade wing specifically. And for just a moment that felt suspended in time, Marcus could have sworn she looked directly at his window, directly at him. She didn't wave. She didn't smile or gesture. She simply nodded once, a barely perceptible movement in her head that might have been acknowledgement or might have been coincidence, that might have been saying, I see you, I know you know, and thank you for understanding, or might have been nothing at all. Then she collected her supplies, moving more slowly than usual, as if this Monday was different somehow, and walked back to maintenance building, her limp as pronounced as always, her dedication as unwavering as ever. Marcus placed his hand over his heart, pressing it there firmly, and whispered to the glass, to the courtyard, to the woman who couldn't hear him, but who he hoped could feel his gratitude somehow. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for being my hero. Thank you for showing me what it means to be a good person. Behind him, his classmates began to arrive, their voices filling the classroom with the energy and chaos of youth and possibility, and Monday morning excitement about the approaching holiday break. Mrs. Henderson greeted them warmly, handing back graded assignments, reminding them about the Christmas party on Friday, preparing for another day of teaching and shaping young minds, and creating the kind of citizens who would see heroes in unexpected places and honor service in all its forms, visible and invisible. Outside, the flag Gloria had raised snapped and fluttered in the sharp December wind, its colors impossibly bright against the crystalline Oregon sky. It flew over a school where a custodian was secretly a decorated combat veteran, where a 10-year-old boy carried his father's legacy with quiet grace and growing strength, where students were learning that heroism wasn't about fame or recognition or medals, but about daily choices to serve, to care, to keep promises even when nobody was watching, to do right because it's right. And in the maintenance office tucked away in the basement of Lincoln Elementary, Gloria Martinez sat at her small, battered metal desk during her morning break, reading a letter from a boy she'd been watching over for 3 years, fulfilling a promise made to a dying soldier in a moment of chaos and courage that she relived every single day. Tears ran down her weathered cheeks, creating tracks of the fine dust that covered everything in the maintenance area, as she read his words of understanding and gratitude and recognition. She folded the letter carefully, precisely, with the same attention to detail she brought to everything, and placed it in the breast pocket of her work shirt, right over her heart, where it would stay for the rest of the day and every day after. Then she stood up slowly, her leg aching from the cold and the old shrapnel wounds, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, picked up her mop and bucket, and went back to work. Because that's what heroes do. They keep their promises, no matter how long it takes or what it costs. They serve with dignity and humility. They make a difference in quiet, invisible ways that ripple out farther than they ever know, touching lives they may never fully understand. They don't need recognition or applause or thanks. They just need to know they kept their word. And sometimes, if they're very lucky, someone notices. Someone bears witness. Someone says thank you. Someone understands that the person mopping the floor or emptying the trash or fixing the broken bulletin board might be carrying a story of extraordinary courage and sacrifice. And that makes all the difference in the world.